12 ships crossed the Vethani border at 3:47 standard, and within 90 seconds, the scout frigate Kelevane lost its forward array to something that should not have been there. Torsh Vasek felt the impact through the hull before the damage report reached his console. A low, percussive shudder that traveled from the bow plating through the structural spine and into the deck beneath his boots, the unmistakable sensation of something physical striking, something physical at a velocity his instruments had not measured, could not have measured, because the object had not existed on any scan until the moment it struck. Around him, the bridge of the Kelevane erupted into controlled urgency. Damage indicators flared amber across the forward quadrant. The sensor officer, a young Vethani named Allah whose cranial frill had gone rigid with alarm, called out the hit in the clipped cadence of someone trained to report disaster without contributing to it. Forward array compromised, 40% sensor loss, no projectile signature on approach, no energy discharge registered. The array was struck by an object that does not appear on any prior scan. Clarify, Vasek said. An object struck us that we did not detect. Correct. Pre-impact scan shows empty space at the point of contact. Post-impact debris analysis shows metallic composition consistent with Allah paused, her frill flexing in a pattern Vasek had never seen from her in 4 years of service. The motion was involuntary, the Vethani equivalent of a cold tremor running through a human spine. Consistent with Vethani hull alloy, our own material, grade 7 pressure plating, exact metallurgical match to the Kelevane's bow armor, as though a piece of our own ship was already there, positioned and waiting in the dark. Vasek let that settle for 2 seconds. 2 seconds was a luxury in combat, but this was not combat. This was the threshold of human space, and the first rule of human space, the only rule that mattered, the rule carved into the Navigation Academy's entrance arch in 9 species scripts, was that haste killed faster than anything the silence contained. Helm all stop, signal the formation. All stop, maintain position, do not advance. The Kelevane settled into stillness. Around it, the other 11 vessels of the Vethani Exploratory Flotilla decelerated in sequence, their drives dimming from blue-white to amber to black as they transitioned from approach velocity to station keeping. Vasek watched them on the tactical display, 12 points of light arranged in a modified diamond, each one representing a vessel crewed by 60 to 80 Vethani who had volunteered for this mission, knowing exactly what the briefing contained and choosing to come anyway. The crossing itself had been violent, not in the way of weapons fire or defensive grids, nothing so comprehensible. The static wall that marked the border of human space was not a barrier in any conventional sense. It was a region of electromagnetic chaos approximately 2 light-minutes deep, and passing through, it was like flying through the neural discharge of a dying star. Every display on the Kelevane had gone white. Every instrument had screamed with input it could not process. The hull temperature had spiked 14 degrees in 11 seconds, then dropped 22 degrees below baseline in the next 3, as though the ship had passed through alternating bands of energy that obeyed no thermodynamic principle the engineers could name. 3 crew members in the forward compartments had reported a sensation of being watched, not observed by instruments or sensors, but watched, the way a person feels watched in a dark room when the watching is coming from something that does not need eyes. The crossing lasted 91 seconds. When the displays cleared, the Kelevane was inside and the forward array was gone. The briefing had said, "No expedition into human space has returned intact in 400 years. Not no expedition has returned. That would have been simpler, cleaner. The distinction was the mission's entire premise, the crack in the wall that the Admiralty had ordered Vasek to pry open. No expedition has returned intact, because some had returned, pieces of them, fragments chosen with a precision that suggested not violence but curation. The Vethani Admiralty's Intelligence Division maintained a classified archive called the Remnant Catalog, a collection of objects, transmissions, and biological samples recovered from the boundary of human space over 4 centuries. The catalog held 17 entries, 17 fragments from 17 expeditions, each one sent by a different species across the breadth of the conquered, each one swallowed by the border. The fragments were all that came back. Vasek had memorized them, not because the Admiralty required it, because the entries were the only map that existed of the interior of human space, and each one, read correctly, told you something about what waited on the other side. Entry 1. A navigation buoy belonging to the Tesserae Hegemony's 3rd Exploratory Fleet, recovered drifting 6 light-years outside the border, 17 years after the fleet of 40 warships entered. The buoy's data core was intact. Its final log entry contained a single coordinate, a position deep inside human space, and 5 words. They are not what we thought. No other data survived. No context. No explanation of what had been thought or what had replaced the thought. The buoy's exterior hull showed no damage, no scoring, no evidence of combat. It had been released gently, deliberately, aimed at Tesserae space with a trajectory so precise that the Hegemony's recovery division calculated a 0.3% probability of it arriving by accident. Someone inside human space had caught a buoy from a destroyed fleet, kept it for 17 years, recorded a single message on it, and sent it home. The Tesserae never sent another fleet. Entry 4. A biological sample, a severed Vethani combat limb, 40 centimeters of armored appendage ending in the 3-bladed manipulator claw that defined the Vethani warrior caste, found inside a sealed container attached to the hull of an unmanned probe that exited the border on a calculated trajectory. The limb showed no signs of violence, no tearing, no crush damage, no energy burns. It had been surgically removed with an instrument capable of cutting through Vethani combat carapace, the densest biological armor in the known galaxy, as cleanly as a blade through membrane. The limb was preserved in a medical-grade stasis field of a design no conquered species recognized, and it was warm, not residual heat from the stasis mechanism, warm the way living tissue is warm. The Vethani High Marshal who received the container ordered it incinerated within the hour. The surgical report, filed before the order was carried out, noted that the limb's cellular structure showed no signs of decay, no signs of death. The cells were alive and metabolically active. The limb had been removed from a living Vethani, preserved in perfect biological stasis, and returned not as a warning, not as a trophy, but as a message whose meaning the Vethani spent decades debating and never resolved. We have your dead, we are giving 1 piece back, the rest we are keeping. Make of that what you will. Entry 11. A transmission, not a physical object, but a signal, received by a Torvny listening post 6 years after the Torvny Directorate sent a diplomatic probe into the exclusion zone. The transmission was brief, 47 seconds of audio on a frequency the Torvny had not used in a century. The audio contained a single voice speaking flawless High Torvny, the formal dialect reserved for state funerals and the declaration of extinction-level threats, reciting the names of the probe's 4-member crew. Just the names, spoken once each clearly, with pauses between them, in the exact order they appeared on the crew manifest that the Directorate had classified before launch. The voice was human. The pronunciation was perfect. The Torvny Directorate's chief linguist, who had spent 40 years studying human speech patterns, stated in her sealed analysis that the speaker demonstrated not just fluency, but a comprehension of the dialect's tonal mourning registers that no human should have been capable of producing. The names were being mourned. Whatever had spoken them was grieving for the crew, grieving in a language and register designed for Torvny grief, as though it understood not merely the words but the specific emotional architecture that the Torvny built their sorrow from. Entry 14. Coordinates. Nothing more. A data packet transmitted from inside the border on an open channel that any species could receive, containing the precise spatial coordinates of a point deep inside human space. The packet repeated once per year, on the same date at the same time, for 63 consecutive years before stopping. Multiple species triangulated the origin. The coordinates pointed to a location at the exact center of the exclusion zone, the densest concentration of the interference field, the deepest point, the place where the static was thickest and the silence behind it was loudest. No species sent a ship to those coordinates. The data packet was cataloged, analyzed, debated in closed sessions across a dozen intelligence agencies, and ultimately filed with a note that read, "Invitation or trap indeterminate. Recommend no action." The packet stopped transmitting 63 years after it began, and the analyst who had tracked it for her entire career wrote in her final report, "I believe they stopped sending because they realized no one was coming. I believe they were disappointed." Vasic had spent 3 of his 6 hours in the reading room on entry 14 alone. The word disappointed had settled into him like a splinter. A species, or whatever humans, had become powerful enough to maintain an impenetrable border across 41 star systems, patient enough to send coordinates once a year for 63 years, and capable of being disappointed when no one arrived. The emotional register was wrong for a threat. Threats did not experience disappointment. Threats did not grieve in your language. Threats did not return your dead with surgical care and warm tissue. Entry 9, the one that had kept Vasic awake through the 14-month planning phase, the one that populated his nightmares with empty corridors and made beds in silence. An entire vessel, a Kelshani survey ship called the Marathon, recovered intact and operational at the border's edge, 41 years after it entered human space with a crew of 200. The ship was undamaged. Its drives were functional. Its hull had no breaches. Its fuel reserve stood at 60%, meaning the ship had traveled extensively inside human space, burning fuel on a journey whose logs had been wiped, and then been returned with enough fuel to reach the nearest Kelshani port. Its crew was gone. Not dead. Gone. Every personal belonging, every uniform, every data pad and personal journal and photograph, and trinket that 200 people accumulate over the course of a deep space deployment, all removed with a thoroughness that bordered on the molecular. The lab equipment was pristine. The medical bay was stocked. The galley stores were full of rations that the supply manifest said should have been consumed 30 years earlier, as though someone had restocked them. The bridge consoles were powered down in the correct shutdown sequence, each station secured in the exact order specified by Kelshani Naval Protocol, a protocol that no non-Kelshani should have known. The bunks were made. 200 beds in 200 quarters, each one made to Kelshani military standard, corners tight, surfaces smooth. And each pillow bore the impression of a head. 200 impressions. 200 depressions in 200 pillows, as though 200 crew members had been lying in their beds moments ago and had simply risen and walked away. The recovery team's chief medical officer, a veteran of 30 years who had processed the remains of shipwreck survivors and battle casualties without flinching, entered the crew quarters, looked at the rows of made beds with their head-shaped impressions, and suffered a psychological collapse so complete that she had to be sedated and evacuated. Her report, filed under duress and sealed by the Kelshani Admiralty within hours, contained one line that every subsequent classification effort failed to eradicate. The beds were still warm. That single line traveled through 4 centuries of interspecies intelligence sharing like a contagion. Unstoppable, unforgettable, repeated in whispers by every analyst who worked the human space file across every species in the conquered. Warm, not residual environmental heat. Warm the way a bed is warm when the person who slept in it stood up 30 seconds ago. 200 crew members, vanished from a sealed and fully operational ship 41 years into a voyage no one expected to survive. and the beds were warm as though they had all stood at the same moment, moments before the recovery team docked. Where they went, no record said. Whether they went willingly, no one knew. Entry 17 was the most recent and the most troubling. A Javari diplomatic shuttle, sent 312 years ago to deliver a formal petition requesting the reopening of diplomatic channels with human space. The shuttle carried a diplomat, a pilot, a communications officer, and 3 ceremonial guards whose presence was intended to signal respect rather than threat. The shuttle crossed the border, transmitted its credentials in 16 languages, and went silent. 4 years later, the diplomat returned, alone in the shuttle, undamaged. She was alive, physically healthy, and capable of speech. She answered every question the Javari government asked. She described what she had seen inside human space. She described the entities she had encountered. She used that word, entities, not people, not beings, not inhabitants, entities, and she described their capabilities, their structures, their intentions with a precision that suggested she had been given permission to be precise. She spoke for 11 hours without pause, without contradiction, without uncertainty. She had been shown everything, and she reported everything she had been shown. The Javari government recorded every word. Then they sealed the recording, destroyed every copy except one, placed that surviving copy in a vault beneath the Javari capital that required the unanimous consent of the entire ruling council to open, passed a law unanimous, no debate, no public discussion, no dissent in the chamber, making it a capital crime for any Javari citizen to enter human space for any reason, under any authority, for any purpose, in perpetuity. The law carried no exceptions, no sunset clause, no amendment procedure. It was written to last forever, and in 312 years no one had challenged it. When the other species of the conquered asked what the diplomat had described, the Javari ambassador delivered a single sentence to the conquered assembly. They are no longer what the word human was invented to describe. The ambassador requested and received a permanent exemption from all future diplomatic initiatives regarding the exclusion zone. No Javari official had spoken publicly about the mission since. 312 years of absolute silence, sealed beneath a capital, guarded by a law that treated curiosity itself as a crime. Vasek had read all 17 entries. He had spent 6 hours in the Admiralty's secure reading room, under armed supervision, without the ability to copy or transmit, absorbing 4 centuries of evidence that something inside human space existed beyond the framework his civilization used to classify danger. The evidence did not describe a weapon. It did not describe an enemy. It described something that exceeded the vocabulary of threat entirely and entered a domain for which the Vethani had no analytical category. The Admiralty sent him anyway, not because they believed the Kelevane and its sister ships would succeed where 17 expeditions had failed. They had sent him because the Vethani species was running out of time. The border was moving. The deep space monitoring arrays that ringed the exclusion zone had detected, over the past 40 years, a gradual expansion of the interference field that constituted the boundary. The static wall of electromagnetic noise that no instrument could penetrate, the wall every chart in every archive marked as the edge of human space was advancing outward at approximately 1/10 of a light year per standard decade. At current rates, it would reach the first Vethani colony world in 600 years. 600 years was long enough for most species to categorize the concern as a future problem and continue with the business of commerce and politics. But the Vethani did not think in generations. They thought in civilizational arcs, in the 9,000-year continuum of spacefaring history that had taught them that 600 years was the interval between a problem and a border, between a border and a wall, between a wall and a silence from which nothing returned. The Admiralty's directive was precisely worded: proceed to the interior of the exclusion zone, determine the nature and intent of whatever occupies the zone, Establish whether communication is possible. Report findings. If communication is not possible, withdraw and report that fact. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not assume hostility. Do not assume benevolence. Assume nothing. Vasek had added his own directive, unspoken, shared with no one. Bring everyone home. He looked at the forward display. The border stretched across the view screen, not the clean geometric line the charts depicted, but a turbulent curtain of electromagnetic interference that shifted and rippled like a membrane drawn across the void. The Kelevane had punched through 90 seconds ago, and the forward array had been destroyed by a piece of its own hull alloy that was somehow already inside, positioned in empty space like a sentry made of the intruder's own body. Allah, full diagnostic on remaining sensors. I want to know what we can still see. Running, 60% lateral coverage, aft array functional, passive receptors nominal, active scanning. She stopped. Her frill went flat against her skull, which was the Vethani equivalent of blood draining from a face. Active scanning is being reflected. Reflected by what? By everything. Every active pulse we emit returns simultaneously from every direction. The return signatures are identical, same frequency, same amplitude, same modulation, as though the space around us is a single reflective surface at uniform distance. A sphere. Not a sphere. A sphere would produce variable return times based on distance to each point on its surface. These returns arrive at the same instant. Zero variance. Every point in surrounding space is behaving as though it is equidistant from us. That is geometrically impossible under every model of spatial mechanics I was trained in. Communications, raise the Admiralty. Burst transmission, highest priority. Felshin, the communications officer, a 20-year veteran whose steadiness under fire Vasek had specifically requested for this mission, worked his console for 10 seconds. Burst prepared, transmitting. A pause that stretched into a silence heavy enough to feel. Transmission reflected. Same phenomenon. Our signal returns to us from every direction simultaneously. We cannot reach anything outside this space. 12 ships, 736 crew. Vasek ran the mathematics in his head. 12 vessels, each carrying between 60 and 80 personnel, navigation officers, engineers, sensor operators, medical staff, communication specialists, damage control teams, and the small complement of intelligence analysts the Admiralty had embedded in the flotilla to observe and record. 736 individuals, each one carrying a family's hope that the volunteer would return, each one carrying the private calculus of risk that had led them to raise their hand when the Admiralty posted the mission brief on the fleet notice boards. The brief had been honest brutally, unusually honest for a military document. It had stated the survival statistics plainly: 0% historical return rate for intact expeditions. It had listed the remnant catalog entries by number. It had included the line the beds were still warm in its original Kelshani, with a Vethani translation beneath. 736 people had read that brief and volunteered anyway. Some had volunteered out of duty, some out of curiosity. A few, Vasek suspected, out of the particular Vethani stubbornness that treated the impossible as an insult to be answered with presence. The Vethani word for courage translated in its oldest form as standing where standing is inadvisable. 736 of them were standing now, inside a space that reflected their own signals back and replaced the sky with something that did not belong. Inside a region that had swallowed every expedition sent into it for 4 centuries, and returned only warm beds and severed limbs and 5-word messages that governments sealed with laws. Cut off. Vasek stood. The bridge crew looked at him, and in their eyes he saw the thing he could not afford to feel: the recognition that the briefing had been accurate, the remnant catalog honest, and the border of human space was not a line on a chart but a threshold. They had crossed it. The threshold had closed behind them. All stations condition amber. Formation tighten to close diamond. Passive sensors only no active emissions of any kind. We listen. We watch. We do not speak unless spoken to. The formation condensed. 12 ships pulled inward until the gaps between hulls were measured in hundreds of meters rather than kilometers. Vasic watched the diamond tighten on the tactical display, 12 vessels huddled in the dark, inside a space that had consumed 17 expeditions and returned only fragments. 20 minutes, 40, an hour, 2. Nothing happened. The silence was worse than any attack Vasic had trained for. He had expected a challenge, a warning, a phenomenon, a scan, something. The remnant catalog was full of events: objects struck, crews vanished, ships returned empty. But the space inside the border was, by every measure the Kelavane's remaining sensors could provide, vacant. No energy signatures, no gravitational anomalies, no structures or ships or debris. Stars, distant and ordinary, burning in patterns, the navigation computer could not match to any known chart. The tactical officer, Commander Ravesh, a specialist in defensive strategy whose job had become paradoxical in a space where there was nothing to defend against, ran passive scans on a 3-minute cycle, each sweep returning the same result. Nothing. No mass signatures. No thermal readings. No electromagnetic emissions beyond the ever-present reflected static of their own instruments. The space was not merely empty. It was aggressively empty, as though emptiness were a condition that had been deliberately maintained, a room swept clean before the guests arrived. Vasic found himself thinking about the Marathon's galley, full of rations, restocked, the beds made. The bridge powered down in the correct sequence. Whatever had returned the Kelshani survey ship had not merely sent it back, it had prepared it, the way a host prepares a guest room. The same meticulous attention was present in this emptiness. The space was not vacant. It was waiting. It had been waiting for a very long time, and it had used that time to ensure that there would be nothing to distract from the moment of arrival. The stars are wrong. Lieutenant Shivari, the flotilla's senior navigator, spoke the words in the quiet, careful voice of a professional confronting data that contradicted her entire discipline. She was staring at her display with an expression Vasic would later describe in his report as reverent confusion. The stellar positions do not correspond to any catalog in our database, not shifted by parallax or relativistic drift, not displaced by time dilation. Different. These are real stars, measurable and present. They are simply not the stars that exist in this region of the galaxy as charted by the conquered. We are looking at a sky that does not belong here. Navigational error. I have cross-referenced against 3 independent positioning systems and the Kelavane's own stellar inertial map. The instruments are functioning correctly. The stars are wrong. A sky that does not belong here. The phrase traveled the bridge in silence, settling into the minds of officers trained to trust instruments that were now working perfectly and reporting the impossible. 3 hours after crossing, Allah's voice cut the silence. "Commander, I am receiving a signal." Source. Everywhere. The signal emanates from every point in space simultaneously. It has no directional origin. It exists the way background radiation exists, as a property of the medium itself. Content. A tone. A single sustained tone at 1420 MHz. Lieutenant Commander Drathi is the flotilla's xenophysics specialist, whose presence on the mission reflected the Admiralty's expectation that whatever they found would require theoretical interpretation before it required tactical response, identified it immediately, her voice thinned by the effort of maintaining professional composure. The hydrogen line. The emission frequency of neutral hydrogen, the most fundamental frequency in the universe. Every civilization that builds a radio telescope discovers it first. It serves as the universal baseline for interstellar communication because it requires no prior agreement. It is not a convention. It is written into the physics of existence by the structure of hydrogen itself. They are speaking to us in the language of hydrogen, Vasic said. They are speaking to us in the language of everything, Drathis replied. The tone held for 37 minutes, constant, omnipresent, filling every sensor and receiver on every ship. Vasic ordered the fleet to hold and listen. You did not interrupt the universe when it addressed you in its own voice. Then the tone changed, not in frequency, not in amplitude, in structure. The single note became two, separated by an interval Drathis identified as the ratio between the hydrogen line and the cosmic microwave background, the residual radiation from the universe's origin. The pair harmonized for exactly 180 seconds, then 3 tones, then 5, then 8, then 13. Fibonacci sequence, Drathis said. They are building a mathematical progression from the universe's fundamental constants. This is a proof of intent, establishing beyond any possibility of misinterpretation that what we are hearing is not natural. It is chosen. Something is choosing to communicate. The sequence reached 21, stopped, 13 seconds of silence, the previous number. Then the transmission resumed, the tones now carrying complex structure that the analysis software flagged as linguistic. It is a language, Allah said. Nothing in our database matches. The syntax is, she paused, read her instruments again, pedagogical. The patterns are structured for learning. It is teaching us to understand it. Vasic ordered every instrument on every ship to record. The language arrived with the patience of a teacher who had infinite time simple structures first. Identifiers, quantities, spatial relationships. Then states, transitions, causality. Then abstractions. Possibility, memory, intention, regret, hope. Each layer building on the last, each concept demonstrated and repeated and varied until comprehension was inevitable. 14 hours. 736 Vethani sat in their ships and listened to something that lived in the fabric of space teach them its alphabet. No one ate. No one spoke. No one left station. No officer enforced the shift changes that regulations required, because the transmission was too extraordinary and too precious to interrupt for anything as small as fatigue. At the end of 14 hours, Felshon and the communications team had assembled a working lexicon, rough, incomplete, but sufficient to parse the final segment, which had been repeating in a patient loop for 40 minutes, as though waiting for them to arrive at understanding. Felshon translated it. He read it aloud to the bridge, and his voice, 20 years of combat and crisis, without once breaking, broke on the second sentence. We are what you were afraid of. We are also what you hoped for. The two have always been the same thing. Silence across the fleet. There is more, Felshon said. You have come to understand what we are. We will show you. You will not be harmed. What you see you will carry back. This is not a warning. This is a gift. We have waited for someone brave enough to receive it. Vasic looked at his bridge crew. 12 faces turned toward him, waiting. The briefing said no expedition has returned intact. The message said you will not be harmed. The catalog held 17 proofs supporting the first and nothing supporting the second. But the diplomat had returned. 312 years ago, the Javari diplomat had come back alive, capable of describing what she saw. Her government sealed the description not because it was false, but because it was true, and the truth was too large for the Javari to hold without breaking. Vasic was Vethani. His species had carried heavy truths for 9,000 years. The weight had made their bones dense, and their patience long, and their silence deep enough to contain things other civilizations refused to name. Helm ahead 1/4 standard. Follow the signal to its source. The Kelevane moved. 11 ships followed. They flew for 6 days through space. That was not the space they knew. The wrong stars shifted as they traveled, rearranging into deliberate configurations constellations composed with the purposeful structure of a language that used light instead of sound. Javari recorded everything, her annotations growing shorter as the days passed, her scientific vocabulary proving inadequate. By the third day she had stopped using technical terms entirely. Her final annotation read, "The sky is a text. I cannot read it. I do not think it was written for us. But it is beautiful, and I believe it means something kind." On the second day, the Kelavane's hull began to sing. A low resonance in the structural members too deep for Vethani hearing, but registered clearly on the vibration monitors, the ship's frame responding to a frequency in the surrounding space, the way a tuning fork responds to its matching note. Drathis analyzed the resonance for 4 hours and concluded that the space around them was vibrating at the specific natural harmonic of Vethani hull construction. Not a universal frequency, not a hydrogen line derivative. The exact resonant frequency of Vethani-designed Grade 7 pressure plating, calculated to a precision of 9 decimal places. Whatever surrounded them had analyzed their ships down to the molecular structure of their hull alloy and composed a note specifically for their material. The hull was not being attacked or tested. It was being greeted in the only language a ship could understand, the vibration that made its bones hum. Vasic ordered the fleet to continue. The singing followed them. After 12 hours it became background, the constant, low hum of something vast acknowledging their presence and saying, in the vocabulary of resonant metal, "I know you are here. I know what you are made of. You are safe." On the third day, the medical officer, Lieutenant Sorving, a specialist in xenopsychology whose presence had been mandated by the Admiralty, reported an anomaly. 7 crew members across the flotilla, stationed on 5 different ships with no communication between them during rest cycles, had experienced identical dreams. Not similar dreams. Identical, down to specific visual details that the 7 described independently, using the same spatial language and the same emotional vocabulary. Each described a door, not set in a wall or a building or a ship. A door frame standing alone in a field of light, warm light, golden, the color of the amber glow that bled through the static wall during their crossing. The door was open. Beyond it was not a room or a corridor or a landscape, but a sensation, the feeling of being known, completely, without judgment, without expectation, without the filters and defenses and performances that every conscious being constructs between itself and the world. Known the way a child is known by the parent who held it before it could speak, not for what it has done or what it is capable of, but for what it is. All 7 reported the same emotional response, not fear, not discomfort, but a grief so profound it woke them. Not grief for something lost. Grief for something found, the recognition that this quality of knowing existed, and that they had lived their entire lives without it, and had not known it was missing until the dream showed them the door. Sorvin asked Vasic whether to classify the dreams as a medical anomaly or a contact event. Vasic told her to log them as both and to monitor the 7 crew members for further phenomena. She did. None of the 7 reported distress. All 7 requested permission to continue the mission. One, a junior engineer on the frigate Tesserel, asked Sorvin a question that the medical officer included in her report verbatim. "Do you think the door is real?" Sorvin did not answer, but she noted in her file in the margin in handwriting rather than typed text, "I dreamed it too. I did not tell the commander. The door was real." On the second day, the Kelavane's hull began to sing. A low resonance in the structural members, too deep for Vethani hearing but detectable on the vibration monitors, the ship's frame responding to some frequency in the surrounding space, the way a tuning fork responds to its matching note. Drathis analyzed it for 3 hours and concluded that the space around them was vibrating at a frequency that matched the natural harmonic of Vethani hull construction. Not human frequency, not a universal constant, the specific resonant frequency of Vethani-designed pressure plating, as though whatever surrounded them had analyzed their ships and composed a note specifically for their material. The hull was not being attacked. It was being greeted in the only language a ship could understand. On the third day, the medical officer reported that 7 crew members across the flotilla had experienced identical dreams during their rest cycles. None of the 7 had communicated with each other. Each described the same image: a door, standing open in a field of light, with no wall around it. Just a door frame, freestanding, and beyond it, a warmth that was not temperature but recognition, the sensation of being known, completely and without judgment, by something that had been waiting. The medical officer asked Vasic whether to report the dreams as a medical anomaly or a contact event. Vasic told her to log them as both. On the fourth day, they found the first structure. The approach was gradual. Drathis detected the anomaly first, a gravitational signature that did not match any stellar body in the database, a mass too large for a planet and too concentrated for a nebula, occupying a volume of space that the instruments said should have been empty. As the flotilla closed the distance over 6 hours of cautious approach, the visual sensors began to resolve what the gravitational instruments had detected, and the bridge went quiet in the specific way that only happens when 12 people see the same impossible thing at the same moment and choose silence over the inadequacy of words. A ring, a torus of dark material orbiting a star that burned in a spectrum Drathis could not classify, a color that sat between ultraviolet and something else, something the instruments registered but the eye could not name. The ring was 700,000 kilometers in diameter, smooth-surfaced, featureless, black as the void it inhabited. By every instrument's measure it was inert, cold, passive, radiating nothing. But when the Kelevane passed within 10,000 kilometers, every crew member on every ship heard the same thing at the same moment. A single word, arriving directly in their minds without sound, without medium, without mechanism, spoken in the language they had spent 14 hours learning. Remember. No one panicked. Vasic had prepared sedation protocols and contingency plans for cognitive overload. None were needed. The word arrived gently, the way a hand rests on a shoulder. It did not command, it asked. And every Vethani who received it understood that the asking was sincere, that whatever had spoken was not imposing but requesting. Remember, what happened here matters. Please do not forget. 20 crew members wept, not from fear, from the gentleness of the request. The Vethani were a species that had spent 9,000 years being feared by their neighbors for their density, their patience, their unyielding endurance. No one had ever spoken to them gently. The word remember, delivered without force or threat, struck harder than any weapon in the remnant catalog. On the 5th day, the second structure, a lattice of light suspended between 2 dead worlds, a web of luminous filaments pulsing in a rhythm the science officer recognized as biological. It is breathing, Drathis said. No one questioned the statement. By the 5th day inside human space, the boundary between the mechanical and the living had ceased to function as a useful distinction. On the 6th day, they reached the source. A sphere, or something that had been a sphere, the way a seed is a sphere before it opens. It hung in the void between 2 stars, split along a seam from pole to pole, its halves separated by a gap through which light poured in frequencies outside the visible spectrum as Vethani science defined it. The surface was covered in markings that shifted as the observer's gaze moved across them, reorganizing in response to the act of observation, as though the surface were reading the viewer and adjusting its message to match the reader's capacity for comprehension. Inside, visible through the gap, was a point of light. Not a star, not a lamp, not a technological artifact, a point of radiance that existed without source or fuel or mechanism. It simply was, and it was aware. Vasic knew this with a certainty that bypassed every rational filter his training had built. The light knew they were there. It had been waiting not for them specifically, but for anyone, for 400 years, for however long was necessary. And now someone had come, and the light was glad. The word arrived again, in every mind, gentle and vast and older than the wrong stars. Welcome. Then the light showed them. Not images on a screen, not language through receivers. The light opened the way a hand opens, and inside was a history not a telling but an experiencing, a direct immersion in 400 years of transformation, unmediated by symbol or metaphor, received whole. Vasic saw it, all of them saw it. 736 minds receiving the same vision, each alone, each entire. Humans had not built a weapon, had not built a fortress, had not sealed the border to prepare for war or consolidate military power or hide from the galaxy's judgment. They had sealed it because what they were becoming could not coexist with what the galaxy expected them to be, and the becoming could not be stopped, and trying to explain it while it was happening would have caused precisely the kind of fear that led to wars. They had changed. Not evolved. Evolution was too slow, too dependent on the random arithmetic of mutation. They had chosen, deliberately, collectively, irrevocably. 9 billion individual minds choosing to move beyond the architecture of individual consciousness and into something larger, not a hive, not a collective where individuals dissolved and were lost. Something for which no word existed in any language because no species had done it before. 9 billion minds woven into a single sustained awareness spanning 41 star systems, operating at the speed of thought across distances that should have required light years of delay. And every mind inside it was still itself, still thinking, still feeling, still remembering, still choosing. But each mind was also aware of every other mind. And the whole was greater than the sum, the way a symphony is greater than its notes, not because the notes are diminished, but because they are heard together, and the hearing creates something no single note could produce alone. The structures were this awareness made physical. The ring was a memory, a memorial to what humanity had been before the change, preserved in matter so the remembering would have weight. The lattice was a thought, a single contemplation running for decades, requiring a structure the size of a solar system to hold. The sphere was a question addressed to the galaxy, held open for 400 years, waiting for someone to hear it. The question, are you ready? Not for war, not for submission. Ready to understand, ready to hear what happened and not break under the hearing, ready to stand before something that had transcended the boundaries of individual existence and see it not as a threat but as a possibility. The Javari diplomat had heard it 300 years ago and answered honestly, listened, understood, carried the understanding home. Her government buried it because the Javari were not ready. The truth would have unmade the structures their civilization was built on. So they sealed it in a vault and passed a law and pretended the silence was safety. The Kelshani crew, the 200 whose beds were still warm, had been shown this same vision. They had chosen, each one individually in the privacy of their own mind. They chose to stay. To walk out of their bunks and into a consciousness containing 9 billion minds and everything those minds had ever thought or felt or hoped. They chose it because what they found inside was not a prison or a trap or a consuming. It was a cathedral, and the door was open. Vasic saw the Tesserae Fleet Entry 1 arrive at the coordinate their buoy would eventually carry home. He saw them encounter the awareness for the first time, saw their commander's face cycle through terror and incomprehension, and then a stillness that was not defeat but recognition. The Tesserae had fought, not with weapons. Their commander had been wise enough to hold fire but with denial. They had spent 18 months inside human space refusing to accept what their instruments told them, running test after test, searching for the natural explanation that would let them maintain the universe as they understood it. They had not found it. One by one, the crew had stopped fighting the evidence and started listening. The buoy was their apology, a single coordinate and 5 words sent home to say, "We were wrong about everything." The fleet itself had not been destroyed. It had dispersed. Individual ships, individual crews making individual choices to stay, to explore, to learn. Some had eventually joined the awareness. Others had spent decades studying its edges, content to observe, accepted as guests in a house too large to comprehend. None had been harmed. None had been compelled. He saw the Kelshani Entry 9. He saw 200 crew members shown the same vision he was seeing now, and he watched their faces as the understanding arrived. He watched them make their choices not all at once, not in a group, but one by one, alone in their quarters, sitting on the bunks they would leave behind. Some chose quickly. Some took days. The last one, a junior navigation officer who had joined the Marathon on her first deployment, and who had spent the entire mission writing letters home that she knew would never be sent, sat on her bunk for 11 hours before standing up. She had not been afraid. She had been saying goodbye to the version of herself that would not exist on the other side of the door. When she stood, she smoothed the blanket, straightened the pillow, and walked out of the quarters and into the light. The bed was warm because she had just left it. The ship was returned because the awareness understood that an empty ship was a message, and the message was, they were not taken, they were welcomed. The vision ended. The light dimmed, not extinguished, dimmed the way a voice lowers after speaking the important thing and waits. Vasek stood on the bridge. His crew were weeping, not from fear, from the devastating, ungovernable beauty of comprehending something too large to hold, and finding that the mind could hold it anyway. "Commander," Felshen said, his voice stripped raw, "there is a final segment. Shall I translate?" Vasek nodded. "You may stay, you may go. Both are honored. If you go, carry this. We are not what you feared. We are not what you hoped. We are what happens when a species chooses not to stop becoming. The border is not a wall. It is a door. It has always been a door. We closed it because no one was ready to walk through. If you are ready, it is open." Vasek looked at the sphere, patient, warm, impossibly gentle for something containing 9 billion woven minds sustaining a single thought that had been thinking itself for 400 years. He counted his people, 12 on this bridge, 724 on the other ships. 736 who had crossed a border no one crossed, learned a language taught by space itself, and been shown the inside of something every civilization had spent 4 centuries calling forbidden. He thought of the Kelshani who walked into the light, the Javari who saw the truth and watched her government bury it. Entry after entry in the catalog, fragments, silences, sealed vaults, laws passed in fear. 400 years of species encountering this truth and being unable to carry it. The Vethani had carried heavy truths for 9,000 years, dense bones, long patience, silence deep enough for anything. He gave 2 orders. The first, record everything, every sensor reading, every translation, every note about the wrong stars. Store it in every redundant system on every ship, make it indestructible. The second, take us home. Not because the vision broke him, because the truth only mattered if someone carried it back. A truth locked inside human space was a sealed vault. A truth carried home was a seed. 12 ships turned. The sphere watched them go. The wrong stars rearranged into a corridor, not a command, a courtesy. A path home lit by impossible constellations, past the breathing lattice and the remembering ring, back toward the door. They crossed the threshold. The static wall parted and the Kelevane emerged into charted space with 11 ships behind it, every system functional, every crew member alive. The Admiralty was waiting. They had not expected the flotilla to return. The contingency files were active. The remnant catalog had a blank page formatted and labeled Entry 18, ready for whatever fragment would eventually drift out. Instead, 12 ships came home, complete, changed in ways the debriefing officers could sense but not name, but complete. Vasek delivered his report standing before 17 admirals in a chamber designed for intelligence too sensitive for any channel less secure than the human voice. He spoke for 9 hours. He played the recordings, showed them the structures, translated the message word by word. He let them hear the hydrogen tone and the Fibonacci sequence, and the language that space used to teach 700 strangers how to listen. He told them about the hull that sang, the dreams of the door, the ring that said remember with the gentleness of a hand on a shoulder. He described Chivari's wrong stars and the navigator's growing certainty that the sky was not displaced, but composed arranged, like a message, like a text written in stellar positions for an audience that might not arrive for centuries. He played the Fibonacci sequence, and the senior admiral's frill rose involuntarily at the moment. The progression passed from mathematical proof into language. The instant the universe stopped demonstrating intelligence and started teaching. He described the dreams, the 7 crew members who saw the same door, the same light, the same grief of recognition. He watched the admirals' faces as he explained the grief, and saw several of them look away, not from discomfort, from understanding. The Vethani had a cultural concept called Chevrat, the sorrow of discovering something beautiful that you did not know you needed until you found it, and knowing that you would spend the rest of your life changed by the discovery. Several of the admirals recognized the concept in Vasik's description and looked away because they were experiencing it themselves, secondhand, through the report of a man who had stood inside a cathedral built from consciousness and come home carrying its echo. He described the Kelshani crew. He told the admirals what the vision had shown him, 200 people making individual choices in individual quarters, each one sitting on a bed and weighing the life they knew against the life they were being offered, and each one standing up and walking through a door that led into something that contained 9 billion minds and welcomed them as though they had always been expected. He told the admirals about the junior navigation officer who sat for 11 hours before choosing, and about the smooth blanket and the straightened pillow and the warm bed she left behind. When he described the warmth of those beds, the youngest admiral in the chamber, a rear admiral promoted 3 months earlier who had not yet developed the disciplined stillness that the senior officers wore like armor, put her hands flat on the table and said, very quietly, "They were not taken." "No," Vasik said, "they were not taken. They chose. Every one of them, individually, freely. The awareness does not compel, it asks. It shows you what it is, and then it asks if you would like to be part of it, and if you say no, it lets you go. Every vessel that came back, the buoy, the probe, the marathon, the diplomatic shuttle, was returned because someone inside chose to send it home, to carry the answer outward. The awareness holds no one who does not wish to stay. And it does not stop offering because it believes. If something that vast can be said to believe that eventually someone will be ready." When he finished, the chamber held its silence for a long time. The senior admiral, old enough that her frill had gone white, and her carapace had taken on the translucent quality of aged shell, spoke first. "The border is expanding." "Yes. It reaches our nearest colony in 600 years. "Yes. Is it a threat?" Vasik gave the question the weight it demanded. He thought of the ring that asked him to remember, the lattice that breathed, the sphere holding its question open for 4 centuries, the light that was glad. "No, it is an invitation. They are not advancing toward us. They are opening the door wider. They are making room." "Room for what?" "For anyone who is ready to walk through." The senior admiral closed her eyes. Her frill lay flat. The chamber held its breath. "What do you recommend, Commander?" He thought of the Kelshani who walked into the light, the Javari who sealed the truth because they could not carry it, his own crew weeping on the bridge, not breaking, holding, finding themselves large enough. "I recommend we begin teaching our children a new word," he said, "because the one we have, human, describes something that no longer exists, and what replaced it has no name in any language. And when our descendants reach the border 600 years from now, they should have the word ready, so they recognize what they find. So they are not afraid. And if they are afraid..." Vasik remembered the light, patient, warm, old beyond reckoning, glad. Then the door will wait. It has been waiting for 400 years. It will wait as long as necessary. Whatever they have become, whatever lives inside that space, thinking its long thought, holding its question open, building its cathedral from consciousness and starlight, it is patient. It will not force the door. It will not push through. It will simply remain with the door open for as long as it takes. He paused. And when someone finally walks through, it will say the same word it said to us. The chamber waited. Welcome. The report was filed, not sealed, not classified. Not buried under any mechanism other species had used to hide what they found in human space. The Vethani placed it in the open archive, accessible to every citizen, teachable in every academy, available to every navigator who wanted to study Shivari's charts of the wrong stars and the impossible constellations, and the sky that was a text written in light. The remnant catalog's blank page for entry 18 was filled, but instead of a fragment, a buoy, a limb, an empty ship with warm beds and head-shaped impressions in the pillows, the entry contained 12 intact vessels, 736 living crew, and a message from something that had once been human and had become something the word could no longer hold. The entry's classification was not permanent deny. It was not sealed or restricted or coded for future destruction. It was open. And at the bottom of the file, in the space reserved for the archivist's summary, the space that in 17 previous entries had held clinical descriptions of recovered fragments and unanswered questions, and the dread of things not understood, someone had written 4 words. No one determined who. The words were simply there when the file was accessed the following morning, as though they had always been waiting for the right entry to carry them. The door is open. 600 years later, when the border reached the first Vethani colony world, the colonists were not afraid. They had the word. They had been taught it in their academies, alongside mathematics and physics and the history of species that had carried truths too heavy for their bones. They had studied Shivari's charts and Drathi's analyses and Felshen's translations. They had read Sorvin's report about the dreams and the door, and some of them had dreamed it themselves, in the way that children sometimes dream of places they have been told about with enough love and specificity to make the telling feel like memory. The border arrived not as a wall but as a change in the quality of the light, a warmth at the edges of the visible spectrum, a hum in the structural members of the colony's buildings, a tone that the oldest residents recognized from recordings they had heard in school. 1420 megahertz, the hydrogen line, the voice of everything. And the children, who had been taught the word, said it back. Welcome.